Z Dave DeLoach, legend himself. Thank you for joining me on episode 2 of my new podcast, Between the Levees. Please introduce yourself to whoever might be listening out there.
I am Z Dave DeLoach, and I used to own DeLoach Marine Services, or at least it was an operating company at the time. I sold everything out of it, and I was in business for myself for 43 years before I got the opportunity to sell.
Well, we will end up at on September 1st of this year at some point in this conversation, but let's begin where it started. I assume you were born one day long ago.
December 7th, 1951.
Quite a
Oh,
day. Quite a day to
yeah.
be born. What did your
Day that
parents
went
do?
down in infamy.
It sure did. A few years before that. What did your parents do for a living?
My dad worked for the railroad. He was a conductor. And my mom never did do any, she didn't work outside the home. She did a lot of volunteer work, but she didn't have any job.
What was life with a railroad conductor father?
Well, I had a good dad. He liked to hunt and fish. And so whenever he wasn't working, we went hunting and fishing growing
Yep.
up. And uh, he was gone a lot in my earlier years, but I don't know, when I probably became a teenager, he took on another position, another job, still a conductor, where he came home every day, but he did work a lot of Saturdays. So, he was away a lot, kind of like being in the towboat business, but
Sure.
not quite as bad as what we had to endure with being away from home, riding towboats. But
Right.
he was gone a lot.
What was did you have any I guess were you drawn to any certain subjects in school growing up? Anything specific that comes to mind?
Daydreaming.
Good for you.
I didn't. I did not have anything particular in mind. Nothing really uh, uh, made my fancy. Even when I got out of high school, I still had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do in life. Uh, I went to good schools and learned the fundamentals of a good education, and could have done a lot better. Went to schools that they challenged, but I didn't have to work too hard to meet the challenge to get by with a mediocre scores. I was a C student, and when I got to college, it really showed up because I really didn't have to do a lot in college the first year and a half. And so I didn't do a lot of studying because everything that we did in the first year that I was at in college, I'd already done in high school. So again, that was not a real big challenge to me. It wasn't until about the second half of the second year that I realized that I had to get on the stick and start reading and studying and doing work.
Sure, right. Backing up a little bit, where were you born?
Oh, I was born in Baton Rouge, and we lived there, another probably a year after I was born. And then my dad took a job out of New Orleans, and we moved down there. And we lived right off of Carrollton Avenue when I was first introduced to New Orleans. And then it wasn't too long, but I remember it. I wasn't very old, but I do remember living there for a while. And then we moved out towards Metairie. And then in 1956, my parents bought a house out towards Kenner in what's now called River Ridge.
Okay.
That's where I grew up, and lived there until I moved away after graduating from high school and went to college up at Northeast Louisiana State College in 1969.
The good old days.
That school, about the time I graduated, it became Northeast Louisiana University, and then now it's Northeast Louisiana University at Monroe or something. I don't know. It's ULM, University of Louisiana at Monroe.
Okay. Okay.
So it's had several transitions since I was there.
What did you study in college?
I got to college. I just took I started out in pre-law. That lasted about 2 weeks, and then I went into a business curriculum, and then finally settled on a marketing and management major. And I graduated in 4 years. So
Yeah,
I
my
learned
my, my degree
things.
is in marketing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
you
where
learn
did
how
you
to.
where did you go to grammar school and high school in New Orleans?
I started out at a school in Kenner on Williams Boulevard, which at the time was only from the levee out, not far out past the airline highway, and then it turned into a gravel or shell road. They had
Okay.
shell, not gravel. They didn't have gravel back then. And it was a very small community. Kenner was not very large at all, but the school was Our Lady of Perpetual Help. And
Okay.
I started out at the old school, which was on the river side of the railroad tracks. And we had wooden buildings and cinder block buildings, and the still had the old church, which was a wooden structure that didn't hold but about 100 people. And uh, I guess it was in the fourth grade or fifth grade that they built a new school, and we moved across the tracks to the new school. So I stayed in the new school 1 year, and then went to a private school from there. So I went to the Stewart School from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and then graduated from there and moved to Archbishop Rummel out in Battery,
And
which
you
is right
finished there?
across the street from where Stewart School was, Rummel High.
Across what street?
Well, it was on Severn, and we were one block off of Severn, but there was a big open field, so you could see Rummel from the Stewart School.
Is that the practice field now?
Well, the practice field is out there somewhere between the school and the old Stewart School. I don't have any idea where it's at the Stewart School. They closed that school up. And actually, the first year that I went there, it was all the way over on the River Road, close to uh, Oshner's. You know where when you pass Oshner's and there is a bend in the road on Jefferson Highway, and it's a hard
Right.
towards New Orleans, hard left-hand turn. Well, if you could turn right on that street, whatever that street was, it was right up on the levee with a river road where that street is the river road. And it was an old two-story, old, I think it was an old cinder block building, but real small school. And they moved over there close to Rummel with a brand new facility. So I got a lot of the brand new facilities in grammar school.
Right.
I went to Rummel. Well, when I went to Rummel, I was only the fourth class in the school. We were the first graduating class that went a full 4 years. Because the first class, they only had a ninth grade, then they had a 10th grade, a ninth and a 10th, and then a ninth, 10th, 11th. And when I went there, they had the ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So, and I graduated from there in 1969.
Or a little piece of history, Z.
Yeah.
So skipping ahead a little bit, you're in college. Tell me about, did you finish college?
Oh, yeah, I finished in 1973. But when I started the first year, I came home that summer, and I got some job. I don't remember, working in a warehouse, or maybe that was the year I was installing air conditioning systems. I don't remember. It was a hot job. I know that. And yeah, but I always had a hard working summer job, even when I was in high school. I used to paint schools during the summertime for the parish.
Okay.
Do that when you were 16 years old. And then I was a lifeguard. But when I came home that summer, I don't remember whether it was the insulation warehouse or working in attics, but it was a horrible job. And then the next summer, in my sophomore year, there was no way to get all of the credits in exactly 4 years. So I stayed the summer and went to summer school to pick up some extra credits.
Mm-hmm.
while I was up there after the summer session was over, my uncle was the general manager of a barge and towing operation out of Monroe, and they were moving products up the Washita River, and they needed some help on a boat one week or for a few days, and I went down and caught a boat and rode it from Columbia, Louisiana, up to Monroe, and I don't know. I think I stayed on it 3 or 4 days, and I was kind of hooked at that point. So
What year was this?
that was in 1970.
Okay.
Excuse me. That was August of 1971.
And what was the crew onboarding process in 71 compared to 2022?
Oh, it was great. I had a bag with a spare pair of pants and a shirt in it, and I got on the boat, and they said, "Go up to the wheelhouse and meet the captain." And that was pretty typical of the way they put everybody on a boat.
Yeah.
And went to the wheelhouse and sat down in there, and I said, "Well, this is nice up here. It's air conditioning." And I was watching those two guys building a coupling. We didn't have winches at the time, and everything was a 65-foot wire with a steamboat ratchet that weighed about 90 pounds.
Mm.
And so they were out there busting their butt putting that coupling together, and I'm sitting in the air conditioner talking to the captain. And after about 15 minutes, after talking to the captain, and I said something to the effect, it's that, yeah, I think I could do this and run one of these. And he got up out of the way and sat down, and he said, "Well, go ahead and you run it." So and here I am running the boat, and those guys up there, and they were hot and sweaty, and I was already running the boat.
And you said that was a 4-day hitch.
About that.
How was it the rest of that experience?
Well, it was great. I got introduced to towboat life real quick, and now I'll tell you, back then we had a little 800 horsepower boat, and it had 6 bunks in it, and we had 6 people on the boat. We had a cook, and all I had was 2 barges, and so you had 3 deckhands, a cook, a wheelman, or 2 wheelmen, captain and a pilot, and that cook got up every morning, made breakfast, and then cooked beans and whatever for lunch, and ate beans at supper and whatever else he cooked for supper. And every day you had a full 3 meals on that boat. And I thought that was the greatest thing ever. But I got on at Columbia, the old Columbia Lock and Dam, which was at the time, the Washita River was only capable of handling 6.5-foot draft. And so they were small locks. They could only put 1 barge in at a time. And you would lock the barge through by itself and then lock the boat through to push it on out and go tie it off and then come back and get the other barge and do the same thing. So locking 2 barges through up there was it was an all-day affair.
Bit of a process, yeah.
You got to go up there and go help the lockman pick his garden, and got you some okra and some peas, and traded him some coffee, and it was a social event.
Sure.
So it was another day to get it from there up to the terminal in Monroe, and we got there the next morning and got the barges docked. Well, by then I was an expert at tying off everything and making tow and giving orders. So, I kind of like that.
So you were hooked.
By the time we left up there, I could pump barges. So,
yeah. So those 4 days pass. You go back to college, or what else?
Well, I was on break at the time. The summer session was out, but yeah, I finished taking my break. Went back to school, and then at Thanksgiving, I went and caught a towboat for a week while we were out of school. Came back, rode until Christmas break, and stayed out 2 weeks and stayed on a boat for 2 weeks, and came back to school, did the same thing at Easter. And then the next summer, I went and caught a towboat and stayed on it pretty much the whole summer.
Okay.
And in fact, I had a pair of shorts and a pair of tennis shoes and a bunch of wife beater shirts, and that's all I wore the whole summer. and we were pushing black oil, number 6 black oil, and it was so hot out there, your tennis shoes would almost melt on the barges. But I was so full of black oil when I got off at the end of that summer that I had this nice golden bronze tan to me. And I took a week and went up to Lake Washita in Arkansas and stayed in the water for 5 or 6 days, skiing and swimming. And my tan started coming off in big splotches. I was stained and tanned.
No kidding. So you end up finishing college. You've gotten a few summers on boats, a few holiday breaks on boats. Uh, where do you go once you have a degree?
Well, you got to get out of college first, and you got let me tell you about that. So, um, about the second or third summer, I don't remember. Let's see, sophomore summer, I was in school. I caught a boat. The following summer, junior year, I was riding a towboat all summer, and so between somewhere along about after I guess it was right after I graduated. That's what it was. So I graduated from college, and my mom came up. Parents came up, and they was all excited because I was graduating from college, which she didn't think I'd ever be able to accomplish. And I handed her my diploma and told her I was going to catch a towboat as a deckhand. So I did that, and when I handed her the diploma, she started crying because she thought that they had wasted all their money and time with me going to college. And I tried to explain to her. I said, "Don't worry about it. I have a plan." So I caught the boat, and I was on it about 2 or 3 weeks when we went to the shipyard in Port Arthur. And when we got ready to leave out of the shipyard, the pilot didn't show up. And so the captain called the office, and they didn't have anybody to replace him. So he says, "Well, make Dave the pilot. He can run the boat better than that guy you had on here." So here I go as the pilot. You didn't have to have a license at the time. They were still grandfathering people in and wasn't requiring licenses, even though they legally you should have had one. But in 1973, nobody cared. And so we took off, went to New Orleans, turned out in the river, and I was like, "Oh my God, I have no idea where I am." And I made it all the way up to the river. We went to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and that was 1973. And it was one of those years exactly like this one. There was no water in the river. We got up to Greenville and had to stop and wait for them to dredge holes in the sandbars so we could get through, and had to and we were just a little 1350 boat pushing 650 foot of tow, and we couldn't get through some of those chutes and those holes that they were digging in there. We'd have to get a big boat to help us push up through there sometimes. And we finally made it to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. The water was so shallow at the dock, we couldn't get the barges to the dock. So we had to take the tow up to Little Rock and heat the barges and pump one barge into another one, and so we could lighter one of them and bring it back down to Pine Bluff and get it next to the dock and pump it. And after we got that one pumped, we went back to Little Rock and heated them again and pumped more cargo into that one. So it was about 2 weeks of lightering and shuttling between Pine Bluff and Little Rock and running aground on a every 6 hour basis. And after we got to Little Rock and made it back to Pine Bluff on the first trip, the captain says, "Okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks." And he grabbed his bags and he got off and went home. And so I was on the boat by myself while we were shuttling up and down from Pine Bluff to Little Rock and pumping barges. And it was interesting. You get right below the locks up there and you'd run aground, and the lock would have to open the gates and flood water down so you could get up to the lock forebay because it was so shallow below the locks.
Yeah.
But we finally did that and got the barges pumped, and we took off with just me on the boat and the three deckhands and went south from headed to Monroe. And finally, I got down to Old River Lock, and they found the captain came back, and I got to get off. So
So these are tank barges you were discharging, you said, in
yeah,
Pine Bluff?
yeah.
What was the was just any crew person a capable tankerman at the time?
Well, we had a tankerman on the boat, but at Monroe, it didn't matter to them if you had a tankerman's license or not. If you could load and pump, same thing at Pine Bluff. The company that owned the barges and the boats had those terminals. It was Moore Terminal and Barge Company, and so they didn't care whether you had a tankerman license or not. They just wanted to get the stuff pumped and loaded. So I got to, another baptism by fire. Go load the barge. Well, how do you do it? We'll go out there and turn the valves in and let product into it. Watch it. When it gets full, shut it off.
So where did your career go from that point?
Well, I went and I got my tankerman's license, and then shortly after that, I went and got my uh, operator's license. It was a operator of uninspected towing vessels, and
Okay.
it was a 10-question test that you went down to New Orleans and in this old wooden building in the old Cotton Exchange, and sat around with all the other drunks and the stairway while you were waiting to go in there and get your license. But it was very very loose back in those days.
Yeah.
And I could tell you some things that I think the statute of limitations is over with, but
Sure hope so.
go into those things. But no, we sank a barge one time, and we didn't call anybody. And after, and it wasn't completely underwater. It like one corner of it was out of the water, and somehow after it had been sunk for about a week, and we were working on trying to raise the thing, this wildlife and fisheries agent showed up, and he was hot. He was hotter than hell, and wanted to know why nobody called him, called anybody, called the Coast Guard, and to tell him. And my uncle, who was the guy in charge, told him, says, "Well, we didn't figure it was sunk." He says, "Oh, this guy came unglued." He says, "Well, the barge is underwater." He says, "Well, not completely. It's just heavy loaded." So, but there was nothing the guy could do. There was no penalties. There was nothing, no requirements. So you got away with things like that.
Right.
Spill oil in the water and nobody cared. That's the common way of emptying the cargo hose back then, was to open it up and let her rip and go over the side. That was the common way of doing it on all liquid tows.
Yeah.
They didn't, we used to not even have drip pans on barges. So, that was 1972, 73. That changed after the Water Pollution Control Act of 1972 got implemented.
Your career advances over time, and you obviously you end up back down here to start your own business. Anything interesting in between when you first got on the river to then?
Well, after riding boats for a while, I went ashore and started chasing those same boats for Ouachita Valley Towing Company and Moore Terminal and Barge, and it was pretty much a one-man operation, and that was me. I was the one man. So I did that for, I don't know, a couple of years, or a year, maybe a year on shore. And in 1975, about midsummer, I got a job with Shotan Transportation, which at the time was the largest petroleum and chemical carrier on the waterways. Big company, had 150 barges and 15 boats.
Is that where you met Frankie?
That's where I met Frankie.
Okay.
I sat across Frankie's desk was on one side of the aisle and mine was on the other. And we looked at each other just like you and I are looking at each other right now for a few months. That was when we were on Barone Street. And I guess it was about 6 months later, they moved to One Shell Square, and Frankie got his own office. And I stayed there until I think it was 1977, 78, somewhere in that time frame. And I went out and caught a towboat. I was told that I was too aggressive for the corporate structure, so I turned in my resignation. So, interesting tidbit: the Margaret O, which is in the Ingram fleet now.
Okay.
I don't remember which boat that is, but it was the Margaret O. Is a St. Louis ship built. I was partially in charge of crewing and supplying and outfitting and chasing barges, and so me and the barge guy, whose name was John Kaufman, who ended up working for Ingram, uh, would run up to Decatur, Illinois, and Decatur, Alabama, and let's see, where was four of those barges were built in Decatur. Four of them were built. I'm trying to remember where the other four were built, but anyway, they had two strings of barges, four in each string, and that 5,600 horsepower Margaret O is built in St. Louis. It came out and it was supposed to go to work for what was at the time the Middle South Utilities, which was the predecessor to Energy, and moving black oil. And it came out and went tied up in the fleet for 13 months. So after it'd been idled for 13 months, they finally got a run for it. And I went and got the boat crewed up, and ready to go, and got the barges ready to go. Spent about 3 weeks getting everything ready, and had a plan to show them how to get the barges set up to go into the dock. So all they'd have to do is take two sets of four and slide them into the dock and hook the chicksand arm to them and go to loading. And I left the boat about 3 o'clock one Friday afternoon, and they were headed down to Marathon, Garyville to load. And this was the first loading of black oil to come out of Marathon, Garyville. Ingram still owned a piece of the refinery at the time. And when the boat got there, they jacked around and didn't do anything. And so I called them on the phone to find out what was going on, why they wasn't getting ready. And they said, well, we'll get it all arranged when we go to the dock. That wasn't satisfactory to me. So I headed up there, got on the boat, and started pushing to get everything in order so that we could shine when we got called into the dock. And about 9 o'clock that night, we put the first cut into the dock, and then went and got the second cut, stuck it into the dock, and everything went smooth. And as I was leaving the boat, the personnel man was showing up, and he said, he was chewing my ass. He said, man, you're about to run everybody on the boat off. So I said, well, too bad. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. And I went home, got up the next morning, went into the office. It couldn't have been a Friday when I left out of there, because the next morning I went into the office, and that's when I got called into the VP of Ops office, and we got to talking, and that's when he said in his best Cincinnati accent, said, well, you're a little aggressive for the corporate structure. Looked at him. I said, I'm not going to sit around here waiting 20 years for your job. Right. I said, so probably would be a good time for me to resign right now. So I gave him my 2 weeks notice. So that was my corporate life. That's the only time I worked for a corporate entity.
Gotcha. So what then led you to go into business for yourself?
Well, after I left Shotan, I went out and caught a towboat, which I rode their boats, and then rode other boats. But in 1979, my uncle, who had been up at Washita Valley Towing Company, had left there back in the mid 70s, and he was looking for something to do. And he had 3 sons who also had been riding towboats and all had their licenses. So we decided to look for something in the towboat business, and there was an opportunity with a company in Baton Rouge that was broke and had investors behind their towboats, and the investors were not happy, and so they took the contract away from the broke guys and gave it to us, and we just we managed to return them some money and managed to build a couple of boats of our own, and we were doing quite well when the manager of the investment company looked at the money that we were generating and decided to get greedy. And he said, you know, I have the right to determine who's going to manage these boats, and I'm going to set up my own management company. And we wouldn't give him the checkbooks. So we split the sheets with him, and he took our boats, and we had them on good contracts. But that was in October of 1982. And this was way before your time, but that was the point in time when the whole world shut down. And it was when Ronald Reagan became president, in inflation at the end of the 70s and the early 80s was in hyperinflation. We were paying 24% interest at the time. And when this guy came along and took the boats, all the customers could see what was happening, and they started slimming down. Their businesses were turning down, and in 30 days he was broke. So we kept the two boats that we had, that we built, and kept them running and paying the notes on them, and we were riding them and doing quite well. And we did that until about 1984. And the finance company called us and said, you know, you're the only account that we have that's still paying full notes. And they couldn't figure out how we were doing it. So they said, let's go into a venture together, and we'll give you all the boats that you can operate, and we'll help you. Yeah, well, it's kind of like getting help from the government. And in the meantime, my uncle passed away. It left me with a towboat company and 3 partners with no real running of a business experience, but it was dumped in my lap, and I learned real quick how to run a business, and managed to survive until 1977. It was a struggle. Every day was a struggle. We would
77 or 87?
Huh?
77 or 87?
87. Oh, excuse me. Until 1987. I'll get to that in a minute. But I mean, you'd come in every day and you'd have to call customers and see if somebody owed you $500 so you could go buy fuel, and somebody else that might owe you $2,000 so you could make payroll. And you know, it was look, the most recent years that we've had were cakewalks compared to the 1980s. Yep. So you did whatever it took to keep cash flowing through the company. And we did that until we expanded. We had 7 boats working, and all of them financed by Westinghouse Credit. And in 1987, something happened in the fall of that year that is like money disappeared. Nobody paid us. And come January 1st, we didn't have enough money in the bank to make the boat notes and payroll. And I called up Westinghouse Credit and told them, said, look, I'm going to make the payroll. We are not going to make a boat note. And they called me back in about 10 minutes and told me, said, well, we need you to bring all those boats back to Houma and tie them up. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, no, I've worked my butt off for you for the last 4 or 5 years, putting all this together and making it work and scratching and to survive. And now you're just going to come take my boats. And so we went to war with Westinghouse Credit. in 1978. So we went through a reorganization in 1978. And we came out of that in 1979 and didn't have any boats, couldn't own anything, but I had other people who could. So we put all of the equipment in somebody else's name and ran it. And so actually, excuse me, we have one boat that we bought out of it, and two boats that we bought out of it, and the other five were purchased by American Commercial Barge Line. We operated or managed them for ACBL. And then, as a matter of fact, the two that I was thinking we bought, we didn't buy. They bought them. We leased one back, and they sold the other one. And then that left us with the five that we were working for them, and the one that they leased back to us with an option to buy it. So we had these boats working out around on the Intercoastal Canal, and had one of them working on the river coming from Paducah. But there was a guy that was running things. He was the general manager on the Gulf Coast for American Commercial for ACBL. His name was Sonny Ivy. And he's the one that was very instrumental in putting that thing together so that we could buy those boats out of that reorganization. And it was just a happenstance phone call because my business partner, Z Dave DeLoach, was a golfer. And Sonny called wanting to go play golf. And I asked him, I said, Cap, you need some boats? He says, as a matter of fact, we do. And that's what got the whole thing started. And so we went into the court and with a suitor, and they bought the boats out of there.
Okay. And what was business life at that point?
It was not great, but it was better. We just ran out of money. We just couldn't do it anymore, and had run out of money. And we were paying an arm and a leg to the finance company. They were in business for themselves. They wasn't worried about us. But we had all these great deals with them that they committed to do things. But if you read the back of the loan documents, it said that if you ever make a less than full payment, you're in technical default. Well, we were in technical default from day one.
Yeah. Because
we were just making partial payments to them. And so I learned real quick, read the documents.
Yeah.
And but hey, I got them because we owed them $3.6 million. And I could see this coming about 6 months ahead. And I called up the manager at Westinghouse and I asked him, I said, who do y'all use to do your surveys on the boats? And he gave me the guy's name. And I called him up and I told him to go out and survey the whole fleet of boats and do a condition and valuation survey on them. And he came back with a value of those boats at $1.455 million. So I took his survey and I just opened the bottom drawer and stuck it in there.
Right.
Here we are about 9 months later. We're in the bankruptcy court, and it gets to the point where the value of the boats is what really is going to determine where you're going with this thing. And Westinghouse is arguing, telling the judge that the boats were worth $3.6 million. And we had, I had paid them $3.8 million for 6 years, and still owed them $3.6 million and started out owing them 3.2. Yeah, it was a finance scam. So they make their argument, and the judge, we had this judge, his name was, he had this Wilfred Brumley mustache with came down here, and he'd lean back and he wore cowboy boots and blue jeans under his robe. Yeah. And he'd lean back, he'd put his feet up on the desk, and he would just sit there and he'd twirl that mustache like this while he was listening and had his eyes closed. And Westinghouse Credit made their argument, and my lawyer When they finished making their argument, she looked at me and she says, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Your Honor, my client has something he would like to say about the value of those votes." And I stood up and I had that survey in my hand. And I said, "Look, Judge, I have a survey here that says that these boats are worth $1.45 million. And the Westinghouse lawyer, of course, jumped up and says, "That's not acceptable. We don't accept it. We object," whatever else law terms they use.
Right.
I let them go on for a minute, and the judge looked at me and said, "Well, Mr. DeLoach, uh, so how are you going to support your value when they're over here telling me how much you owe and what the boats are worth?" I said, "Your Honor, I used their surveyor." And he sat up in his chair, he looked at me and says, "Tell me that again." He says, "Well, they have a surveyor," and his name was I said, "They use him to do all their survey work."
Uh-huh.
And I said, "I called him and got him to do the condition and valuation, and that's the value he put on them." And he looked over there at that lawyer at Westinghouse. He says, "What do you say about that, Mr. Westinghouse?" And they said, "We accept that they're worth $1.45 million. So
Yeah.
ACL got to buy them for $1.45 million. And that made the deal work. And then, so we worked for them for 20 years until it was time to get out of that deal and go into another one. So
that was 7 boats or 5?
Well, it was 5. Yeah, the 2 that they sold one, they chartered the other one to us, and so that was the first of 8 boats that we built back up with. So we were working 5 boats and expanded it to 8 for ACL of their boats. We took all of their canal operation boats and merged them all into our fleet. And then we started buying used boats and putting them to work. And so we ended up with 8 boats of our own, plus the ACL boats. And we did that until 2007 when I got the call from, and he was picking my brain about operating boats on the Intercoastal Canal. And after listening to him for about an hour and giving him information, I finally said, "Look, it sounds to me like you're fixing to start your own operation on the Intercoastal Canal. So instead of you having to go out there and build your own fleet of boats, why don't you just come over here and buy all of my boats and I'll operate them for you?" And he said, "Well, you're serious?" I said, "Yeah, serious as a heart attack." In about 2 minutes, he called me back. He said, they ran me out of the staff meeting when I told them what you said and said, "Get on the phone and buy those boats." So Ingram bought my 8 boats. And
Right.
we did that whole deal with Ingram doing all their surveys and due diligence. And in 30 days, they bought the boats. And we went to work for them in July 1st of 2007. And still working for them. We were working all the boats for at the time. And we had a plan. At the time, they had moving everything for them on the canal. So once they bought me, they didn't need the boats immediately because they still had a contract with them. So we kept working the boats with, and they needed the boats. And we got it worked out so that over a year, we would bring the boats in slowly and put them to work in the Ingram business stream and take them out of the. So that took about a year and a few months. And we did well. We worked with Ingram and made some money. We weren't getting filthy rich, but we managed to make some money. But I had sold all the boats to Ingram, and I did put some money in the bank at that time. And which is a good thing because we ended up needing it later in the last few years when COVID came along. But 2012 we had a slowdown, and by 2016 it was getting cutthroat out there, and it got tough to do business after 2016. And we had a few good years after that. But when COVID came around, but it got to be horrible. And I had built a shipyard to service all these boats and doing work for Ingram for their fleet of boats out of Baton Rouge. Well, it's a good thing I had it because I needed a place to tie up boats when COVID came along. And I applied for my PPP money and got it. And if I hadn't, we wouldn't have been around today because we'd have been broke quickly. But the PPP money kept me surviving for the next year and a half.
But what was Dave's background to then support the business with you, and how were the roles split up?
He kind of came up the same way I did on the same set of boats at Ouachita Valley Towing and Moore Terminal, and chase boats and pump barges and the mid 70s, about the same time I went to Shotan Transportation, he quit riding boats, and he had been riding for Coastal Towing also. So he worked for John Roberts' dad, Doug Roberts, and but he got off of boats and went to work for American Commercial in the mid 70s, and he was working for Sonny Ivy, and that's where the relationship was established with Sonny Ivy. And then when we went into business, of course, we were all back on boats. But, it's when you build good relationships with people early in life and you can depend on them later. And that's your formative years. And I tell everybody, go build relationships. Don't learn how to do deals and shake hands on them and make sure people can trust you. Because if you can't depend on somebody, then the relationship isn't worth a damn.
Right.
And so every place that I've worked, that's what we've tried to do, is build a good handshake relationship. And where, you witness when we were working with you, is that you can call us up and tell us a problem and we'll work it out. We'll get it figured out And if I tell you this is how we're going to have to do it, then you can trust that that's what we're going to have to do.
Sure.
And so you start respecting each other's opinions.
Right.
And that's what good business relationships. And but after COVID, the business just didn't come back the way that I would like to have seen it come back.
Yeah.
And it just happened. Somebody came along and wanted to buy my equipment and take my people and start their own business with it. Well, he was already in business, so we sold it. So it's just a different world. It's not the world that I came up in,
right?
And it wasn't fun anymore, and it was very stressful. And I'm 71. It's time to get rid of stress.
Yeah, I agree. So backtracking a little bit, where in the timeline did you meet a nice lady that you decided you could deal with for the rest of your life?
Oh, yeah. That was in 1977. And she was sitting out at the pool, and we lived in an apartment complex in Metairie. She lived upstairs with her mother. So we developed a good relationship. And after a couple of years, we had a captain's meeting at Shotan. It was the last one that I got to go to. And she came with me. And it was over at the Hilton Inn at the airport. And they had a really nice lounge. And they had an oyster bar. And she got in there with all those boat captains and engineers at the oyster bar and drinking and eating oysters with them. And she was holding her own. So I said, well, she's got potential because she can handle all the boat captains and boat engineers.
Right.
She's tough. So we came home that night and I asked her to marry me.
Yeah.
She was drunk when she responded, but
I was like, ask me again in the morning.
Yeah, ask me again in the morning.
That's a hell of a night. So how many years later were you married?
A year.
Okay.
I was so I was planning we planned it for April 1st so that I could remember what the anniversary date would be.
Yes,
I
sir.
wouldn't
Yes, sir.
be getting that. And I got a call from a guy named who at the time was the manager of operations for Ohio River Company and Midland Enterprises in Cincinnati, which was a parent company for Shotan Transportation. And I had worked with him in New Orleans at Shotan, and he wanted me to come up and manage their barge maintenance fleet, their fleet of barges, and manage the maintenance on them. And so I flew to Cincinnati, and it was I left a perfectly good, beautiful bluebird October day in New Orleans, where it was about 75 degrees and perfect weather, and flew into Cincinnati and got off the plane, and you couldn't tell the difference in the sky and the ground. It was all gray and slush. And so immediately I said, I'm gonna have to have more money. I ain't coming up here for what they're offering.
Right.
So I went over there and spent the day with them, and we talked, and I told them how much I was going to have to come up there. And they looked at me like I was crazy and said, well, we can't pay you that much money. Oh, it was a tremendous amount of money, $25,000 a year. And they wasn't going to have it. So I said, well, see y'all later. I'm going back and get on the airplane, and went home.
Right.
And I stayed out there riding boats and went into business for myself.
So at some point then you ended up having children. Where were you in your career when your oldest was born?
Let's see. My first son was born in 1983. My second son was born 1984. Five.
Thank you, Miss Sharon.
1985. She's monitoring everything I say.
As she should.
And then, what year was Elissa born? 1990. And Elissa was born in 1990. I, like any other good parent, struggled to raise them on what we were being able to pay ourselves, and riding boats, gone a lot, but managed to do it. But it was, I'll tell you what, one of the most miserable times I ever had was leading up to our reorganization, our bankruptcy in 1987, 88. And just coming up with the decision to do it was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. But I couldn't see any way out of it. We were just dead broke. And it was like a big weight was lifted off my shoulders when we finally went over there and filed for bankruptcy in 1988. So, but that's one of those business learning experiences.
Right. Sure.
And I'll bet you if you listen to my timeline and you listen to Frankie Morton's timeline, there are two rails on the same railroad track.
I've already noticed certain commonalities there.
Yep.
Well, what are you doing with yourself these days now?
Well, I am gainfully employed by a company called Intratug. And September 1st, Intratug bought all of our equipment, bought all of the equipment at the shipyard, hired all of our people. They're going to make a go of it some kind of way. The guy that owns it is he is an accounting type thinking guy, and he is looking at the numbers on what he has to do to make it work. And you know what? It's not a bad thing in today's world. I'm from the old school that builds relationships and had too much concern for my employees. And it was just tough to make money when you're doling out all your money, trying to keep your employees happy and keep them with a paycheck coming when you didn't have enough work to support it. So he'll figure it out. But I work for him, and my job is the industry liaison, and I work ad hoc. So that means that I work, if they need me for something, I'll go do it, but I'm not going to chase boats, chase people, and worry about incidents and take phone calls in the middle of the night. So my phone hasn't rang since September 1st.
When you're not working these days, now what are you doing?
On September 2nd, my wife and I bought a Sprinter van.
Okay.
We went to the attorney's office on that Friday morning and bought it, and came home, put stuff in it, and loaded the dog up. And we went down here to the end of Highway 966 and turned left on Highway 61. And she said, "Well, where are we going?" I said, "We're going down here. We're turning to the left." And we went. We ended up in Vicksburg, and then drove up and visited with Dave Surt. Made a nice weekend of it. Came back, and I've been taking care of all of the wrapping up kind of stuff. But other than that, we get in the Sprinter van and we go places. And then I got an excavator in the backyard digging out a pond. And so I get on my bulldozer and ride the excavator and dig holes and get in the Sprinter van with the dog and with Sharon. And we go to places, and we're going to, we're building us a house in Gulfport on the beach.
Okay.
So just around the corner from Frankie Morton's house. Frankie and Jenny will be our neighbors. And so we'll be living part-time in Gulfport.
Well, good for you, man. I hope y'all do enjoy. I hope you find some peace and quiet. And I do appreciate your time.
Hey, the lady came this morning. I'm buying some more insurance for that takes care of you in case you have some health issue and long-term care, like nursing home. And I bought some more insurance, and the lady came and gave me a physical this morning. My blood pressure is 110/70. So
Couldn't ask for anything more.
no. But the top of my head doesn't feel like it's going to blow off. I'm really enjoying not working right now.
That's a good start, man. But thank you for your time.
See you later, buddy. Bye-bye.